Well, good morning, and it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be a participant in this program. It's a really, as Bruce said, a real opportunity to take stock of the U.S.-Japan relationship, both the achievements, the changes in attitudes, and in the case of the project that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, the way that Japan matters for the United States, across states, congressional districts, across various variables. And we've built a database. Bruce said that the Pew product that he's released is free and searchable, and so is the Japan Matters for America website, which I will demonstrate in a few moments, but let me say a few things. First, let me start by thanking Admiral Blair, Kazuo, and Dan, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA for support of this project. Financial, to be sure, but really more importantly, thank you for your collaborative work, for working with us on design and helping us think through options of ways to represent information, et cetera. I also want to thank the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission, which helped us support part of the website, the interactive website. And very importantly, I want to thank all my colleagues at the East-West Center in Washington who did a tremendous amount of data and analytical work through huge spreadsheets in designing very complicated code and architecture on the website, as you'll see. So those are my thanks. Let me just say a couple things. The overall theme this morning is images and reality, and Bruce took a wonderful cut at both images and reality through his public opinion polling and the results. We've taken a slightly different tack. What we have done is really look at some of the data and then the analysis of that data and the way in which Japan impacts and interacts with the United States, not only at the national level, but really by state and congressional district level. And so this is kind of a reality-based approach to this. Let me explain what the products of this initiative are, and I'm going to talk about two today, but I'll just mention there are really three products. One is the website, which you see here. The second is a set of publications, and there's a Japan one, and a new Japan one will come out in September. So just stand by. It'll be about 40, 50 pages. We don't know exactly how it'll all shake out. And then there are the one-pagers, which you may have seen downstairs, and these are available for every state and congressional district. So those are the products, and let me talk about the first two. As Dan mentioned, this product Japan is part of this Asia Matters for America project. So we've done the same thing for Asia as a whole, for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Then, of course, you see Japan, which I'll talk about, South Korea, Australia. We're working on China, India, and Taiwan. So those are in progress. So just wanted to let you know where this sits. And we hope that this is a tool not just as a one-off or a one report, but sort of an ongoing living tool that people will use for a variety of activities, which I'll be happy to talk about how it's being used across the country today. Why do this project? Because there was a sense when I returned to Washington that there's a lot of wonderful policy and elite expertise on the U.S.-Japan relationship. But what struck me is still how important Japan was as I traveled around the United States. And this came concurrently with the narrative of China's rise, and to some extent, the sort of flip side of that was Japan's decline. So it was a useful way of testing the proposition really is, how important is Japan to the United States? Of course, we can talk about the big strategic and defense and alliance issues, but how do Americans interact with the U.S.-Japan relationship? And it's clear that most Americans, most of the time, do not interact with the U.S.-Japan relationship in the alliance context, or in defense policy guidelines, or a reinterpretation of the Constitution. Most Americans, most of the time, interact with Japan through civil society links, educational links, tourism, commercial relations, investment, trade, travel. So we wanted to try and capture that. So that's the kind of the driver. And it sort of addresses some of the, I think, false narratives that China has supplanted Japan in the United States, or that Japan is not significant anymore for the U.S. So let me talk you through some of the big highlights, and then I'll demonstrate the site so you can use it and run through it at your leisure and take a look at what's there and how you might use it. First of all, we can go through all kinds of statistics which will bore you to death about how many states rank Japan as number 3 for their trade relationship, or how many investors. basically the findings are as follows. One is that Japan is hugely important nationally at the state level and congressional district level for almost every state and congressional district in one way or another. Second, that Japan is not important only to a small set of states or a geographically concentrated group of states. It's important across the United States. And that was a finding, especially if you do it on per capita basis or if you do it on a growth basis. And again, it depends on which variable you're looking at. Is it, if it's not students, if it's trade, if it's investment, if a new plant has been built in that district, et cetera, et cetera. The third is that Japan is not significant only on one or two issues, like investment or like trade. It's very important on sister city and civic relationships. It's very important on tourism. It's very important on cultural exchanges. So it's a wide swath of areas in which citizens of our country interact with Japan, not just a couple of areas. I will say 3 or 4 highlights. Every state in the United States in 2013 exported at least $30 million of goods to Japan, which is an awful lot for each state. Nearly 50% of all US states had exports to Japan that supported more than 10,000 jobs. In 76% of states, we found that visitor spending from Japan was above $50 million. So one could go on and on about this. You can adjust it for growth rates. You can adjust it for per capita. You can adjust it for changes. You can adjust it for comparative basis. But the bottom line is that across all of these variables, every state and congressional district had a stake in the US-Japan relationship to a greater or lesser degree across numerous factors. And that sort of is a very, I think, a significant way of looking at this. Let me now just turn to, and I'll be happy to give you more. Let me just show you how the site works. So let me first go to, I'll come back to the interactive data. The first thing to note is this site is a repository not only for the interactive data, graphs, charts, and one-page summaries that I showed you and will show you again, but it's also the place to get news, information, and articles about local US-Japan connections. So I'm just going to go to articles, and if I'm lucky, this will all work perfectly. So you'll see that we cover articles under 3 areas: education and exchange, trade and investment, and politics and security. So this is a series of articles, and I'd urge you, this is one on Kentucky-Japan ties, of course, the First Lady's recent trip, art in Minneapolis-St. Paul. There's a story, I think, I'm looking from a distance, but Indiana-Japan educational exchange. So this is where we put posts from around the country, and we'll be working with journalism schools and others to constantly post updated news information about US-Japan connections. And so we're looking at working with several journalism schools. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. The second thing I wanted to show you, and of course, like any website, it's always in the process of being updated and amended, but these are graphics that are non-interactive, and you'll see a list of them. And we're constantly creating new information visuals and graphics to post on this element of the site, again, highlighting the US-Japan relationship. The third area I just wanted to show you is publications. So if you want to download these are all of the publications. We released Australia up on Capitol Hill a couple weeks ago, ASEAN, Korea, Japan. The Japan one, as I said, in September we plan to release a new one, so it'll be downloadable here. There's some of the earlier versions. And then let me go back up here and show you the main site, interactive. So this site allows you to compare your state or states around you, but not yet congressional districts, for which entirely new software will be required. But in any case, let me just show you. Across this band, you can search. So right here, it's trade. So these are the major goods exports to Japan. And if you want to, for example, compare 2 states, let's take my state, Washington. And can someone tell me, am I in Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't see it from this angle.
That was West Virginia.
West Virginia. Okay, thanks. can't see it from this angle. Let me declick. So down here, you can now compare the relative distribution of those trade components and goods. You can also use the time series data. We have done it to 5 years, but eventually you'll be able to do it maybe 10 years. And we're also looking at a way that you can put Japan in the context of 5 other countries in Asia and globally, a global figure. So this will be a very useful way for people to contextualize the importance of Japan for their state, their district, and nationally, not only bilaterally, but in a global context and in the context of key US partners in the Asia Pacific. And I think what you'll find there still is very interesting account of how important Japan still remains. Now you can do all kinds of songs and dances, you can do jobs, students, I could go on and on, but I really urge you to spend 5 minutes on the site. It's so very easy to remember. It's asiamattersforamerica.org/Japan. And you can go straight to the site. It should be on all of the printed material as well that's been given to you. So those are the main topics. You can also go into individual states, these are heat maps for how significant Japan factors into that state. Let me do one other thing. Let me go to your downloadable. This is the congressional districts and states. Currently, we have one-page summary profiles for Japan, Asia as a whole, and for ASEAN. So again, to just take my state as an example, you can click on that and print out your one-page PDF of Japan's impact on Washington State. In due course, we will be able to do some more nifty things on this. Again, you have to build the architecture. Remember that embedded in the back of this architecture website is all of the data for 5 years across all these variables for 50 states and 435 congressional districts. So it takes some time to load them in Excel and run the computations that work. And I will say this up front, if you find a bug, if you find a discrepancy or an idiosyncrasy that you can't explain, let us know, because we're constantly checking and figuring it. There are calculation mistakes done on the back end of the website that we need to adjust for. So there is a way of looking at the profile, let me just end, because my time is almost up. Let me end with a couple of caveats first of all, I always say about this project, this is not physics. So please don't expect precision. These are numbers that we use from reputable sources. That means almost always where possible, either US government or Japan government databases. We do work with a company called Trade Partnership in cases where we cannot assign value to geographic areas because many variables aren't collected by geographic areas. And I don't want to say anything about how we get our congressional districts, but they change, and therefore allotting value to them is not necessarily a question of calculus or mathematics. It's a question of distribution, either by zip code or by county or by port, or there's lots of ways methodologically. And of course, the site has a full explanation of all the methodologies we use for every variable, so we can explain how we got to that number. And I would just use the numbers as round bases, but they do give us an ongoing comparative basis. And the final thing I'll close with is a kind of positive, but also a limitation. The positive is that I don't believe the work we've done here on the importance of Japan actually reflects just how important Japan is. Obviously, it can't capture all of the political, security, international relations importance of Japan. But even on economics, there are limitations. Let me give you an example that we constantly encounter and haven't found a workaround. I'd welcome a solution to. It is very difficult to get investment data at the state or congressional district level. It's near impossible. We use databases for companies. You can geographically GPS code their address and then assign value. Some investment numbers are suppressed for proprietary reasons because companies don't want to release them. There are multiple methodological problems. But we can say, with a fair degree of confidence, how many employees Japanese firms do employ overall in the United States. We can say that the United States receives about 30% of Japanese foreign direct investment. we can say that the U.S. is the #1 destination for that foreign direct investment. So that's one limitation. The second big limitation is many people talk about the sort of flatlining of U.S.-Japan trade. And it's true. I mean, it depends on the year, it depends on the state, et cetera. But let's say that's true. I think it doesn't sufficiently account for a couple of variables for U.S.-Japan trade. One is that as Japan companies have offshored their production facilities throughout Asia, much of U.S.-Japan bilateral trade in the production and supply chain is not being caught in the bilateral nexus, right? It can't be counted because its value in a production supply chain. Your guess is as good as mine how to account for that. I generally work on a mathematical model in this, looking at this and breaking down the Asian Development Bank Institute of the iPhone, which I'm using as a stopwatch, by the way. I've got 3 minutes. If you take the iPhone as a kind of stand-in for all U.S.-Japan trade, which is obviously is not, you can account some share of that value to add on to the U.S.-Japan trade, just as the Asian Development Bank Institute did for U.S.-China trade. So I would add another 20–25% if you add value that's produced by offshore Japanese companies. The second thing this is very difficult to capture, I think, which shows the significance of U.S. and Japan, is company tie-ups, mergers and acquisitions, cross relationships on innovation and R&D. And again, these are very difficult to capture because many of them are proprietary and very difficult. There's no set database where you can achieve them. Having said those limitations, I do think, and I'll make sort of the pitch, as it were, that the site overall, and you just click back here and you can go back to this site, does allow you to get a fairly good look at the continuing significance of Japan across the United States. So I'd be happy to address any questions or comments, but this I hope will be useful to you, and I do hope you'll spend a few moments of your precious time on maybe trolling around the website, trying to play with it interactively, see you can print out the graphics, et cetera. And again, we look forward to your suggestions and comments on improving it further. With that, thank you very much, Dan.